Yes, I'm doing another MMA vid for two reasons, and I will get to the second reason here in a minute, which is the real reason why I'm doing this video. But since I'm doing one, I figured I would answer this. Dante Savage actually asked if I would. He wanted my input on fighters' pay, since this is a big topic of discussion, and he wanted me to kind of answer the question, so I thought I would give it. You know, I'll be honest. I think in UFC, fighters' pay is pretty much a joke. I don't think they're getting paid enough. I know people come on here and say that, you know, you can't be paying what Affliction's paying, and I agree, except for the fact that because UFC will not pay the heavyweights what they're willing, the heavyweights want. And at some point, with this, especially with the heavyweight division, you're going to get to the point where I think, particularly the guys who can strike, are just going to go box because they can make more money, you know, boxing than they can fighting in MMA. And that is going to be a big problem that UFC and MMA in particular is going to have to fight down the road when it comes to heavyweights, because no matter what anyone wants to think, heavyweights draw. They draw, they draw, they draw. There's no doubt that they draw. They draw in boxing, they draw in MMA, they draw in, you know, pro wrestling, draw in whatever they draw. People like seeing two big motherfuckers beat the shit out of each other. Just, it's the way it is. You know, I mean, people sometimes like to watch two little guys beat the shit out of each other, but you get two big guys to beat the shit out of each other. That's what people like to see. So, it's one of the reasons why I'm real sad to see that, you know, Affliction's probably going to put on their next pay-per-view, and that'll probably be it, unless something drastic happens. Elite XC's dead. Dream's dead. You know, you still have Strikeforce, but, you know, Strikeforce might be able to turn into something, but we have to wait and see. You know, unless they get a big influx of money, that might not happen, and the economy might kill them too. So, and you know, the economy has a big thing to do with it as well. As you know, UFC reported even on their, I believe at the end of UFC 91, that they had already had some sponsors already start jumping ship. So, just for financial reasons. But that's kind of my thought on that. I do think that the pay scale is a bit crappy to some guys, to be honest, because honestly, you know, if MMA wants to be better, seem bigger and better than boxing, they are going to have to start matching. Now, I wouldn't say the top guys, because, you know, you can't be going crazy like boxing has done, but definitely you know, guys need to be making, you know, 6 digits. You know, the guys that are supposed to be on the pay-per-views need to, you know, probably be making up 6 digits and more. I would say would be fair. Is that economically feasible? I don't know. I don't know UFC's books, but I definitely don't think guys are making as much as they need to be making. So there is that. Now, to what I actually think what I want to talk about with this video, and not go into a bunch of diatribe that most of you don't really care about. After watching UFC 91 the other day, and I was last night actually, I was flipping through YouTube, looking at different things. Actually, I was just looking at music. I was looking at a lot of different music, and somehow I came across the Pride theme, of all things. And being a Pride fan, it was a guy actually doing a acoustic guitar version of the Pride theme, which was kind of strange. And from there was a link, and I clicked on the link, and it was from UFC. It was from not UFC. It was from Pride 32, which was their debut show in Vegas. It was the first U.S. show they had ever done, and this was a big deal when it happened because no one had really thought they would ever do a U.S. show. The fact of the matter is they were pretty much on their last leg when they did that show. The Yakuza scandal had already hit, and it didn't look like they were going to be around much longer as they were losing a lot of money. However, they put on this show. Now, I remember when the show happened, particularly because I wanted to go to the show, and because of work I wasn't able to. And so I ended up watching the pay-per-view at home with a bunch of my buddies who I invited over. I said, you know, I'm going to watch this thing anyways. You guys want to come over? We have a few beers, do that sort of thing. So they did. We all sat around. And most of them are not MMA fans. They just were like, ooh, watching guys beat the crap out of each other. That's always good. So we're all sitting around. And if you have never seen the intro to a Pride show, I've got 2 clips there. They're both the U.S. clips. They're from the 2 U.S. shows, and they show the one of them shows the complete intro for, I believe, 33, and then there's 2 other ones that show the full one's the video package intro, and the other one is the fighters intro for 32. And these, to this day, and this is what really made me miss Pride, is I was watching the one from 32, and I just stood there and I watched it. And after watching it, I literally wanted to go watch the pay-per-view. I got the DVD back behind me. I wanted to actually put it in my DVD, my computer, and start watching it. They're that good. They pretty much blow the living crap out of anything UFC has ever done in that category production-wise. This is like HBO boxing and WWE video quality all mixed up into one and thrown out there. It was just so amazing. And then to go to the second one, the second US show, and it was even better, where they took little digs at UFC while they were doing it, which was pretty good. And of course there was the fighter intros with their crazy female ring announcer who just adds a lot. So I have no idea why. I'm sure it's very hit or miss for some people, but the people that like her just really like her. But it did add a lot, and I remember when we watched, and it made me remind myself, it reminded me of when I watched that pay-per-view in particularly the first time, because it was live. Usually you had to, you were watching them taped, and so I could just watch them whenever I wanted to. But this was live, and it was a big deal, and so we were sitting around watching it. And my buddies just kind of stood there and went, "Good God, that was awesome!" when it was over, and they just kept saying, "Good God, this is awesome!" Up until not even any fights. It was just the fact that it looked like the spectacle that it needed to be, which is something a lot of people have noted UFC doesn't do. Now, really made me miss Pride. It got me kind of down, because I was like, good God, this was so good. And a lot of people would say, well, Dream was close, but Dream never really got there, mainly because they never really had the heavyweights consistently to go out there and do their thing. So, yeah, so it kind of got me down a little bit, but it just kind of did for some weird reason. I can't really explain it, but it's one of those things where I watched it and I was like, dear Lord, this is still so much better than anything UFC has ever done. And then of course I watched the second one and I was like, wow, this is just so much better than anything UFC has ever done. And it made the events always seem like an event, which is something that almost every Pride show, even the Bushido shows, made them seem like events because of the big elaborate, stage production and all that. Now, part of the problem with that was, if you watch the U.S. version of the shows, the commentary team would often talk over these elaborate intros, which kind of sucked because the intros were so awesome. You just kind of wanted to kind of take it into it. But after watching these and thinking about the shows a bit, I realized that I had never really heard what I had never really heard any comments or anything, any audio from Observer Online and Wrestling Observer and Figure 4 Radio. And so I went to their site, since I'm subscribed to their site, and looked it up and just to see what they said about these two events. And it shocked me, not for what they said, because they said pretty much what I thought they would say, which was they really enjoyed them. They felt like events. They felt so much better than anything UFC had put on. The first event in particular, if you watch the intro, the thing is, this is an American crowd, and the fans were just so into it, and I think it was because it was different, because it was a spectacle. And I was listening to their program, and they were talking about the fact that it worked, but they also talked about that there was UFC guys there, particularly the Fatellas were there, and for this event, apparently, Dave said this, and that they had watched the show and they thought the show was a failure because it was too much like pro wrestling, and the U.S. media would not take it seriously because it was too much like wrestling. And I'm sitting there looking at this and going, who gives a flying fuck? This was awesome. I mean, look how much better this was than what you put on. The fights were still good. The fights were as good as anything UFC was putting on at the time. And and then you had all this other stuff going on around it, which didn't take away from the fights. It really added to the fights. You wanted to see the fight. You were like, "Oh wow, this is awesome!" You were pumped to watch it, and it's something that really made me miss Pride a lot more. And listening to them talk about it, and just it was kind of like, UFC's successful, so you can't really doubt what they're doing, but and I'm not here to necessarily say they were wrong, but to look at that crowd and just the way I felt, the way that I remember when I watched that first show with my friends, the way they were just so freaking into it. The fact that when Fedor, who, most Americans had no clue who Fedor was, unless they just happened to get that event, and and there was probably people at that event who were, in Vegas, heard it was an MMA show, just went to go see, had no idea. My buddies didn't know who Fedor was, and he gets introduced the way they introduced him, and they were like, "Oh my God, who is this guy? This guy must be a badass," the way they're introducing him, and I'm like, yeah, he's pretty much a badass. But it was that kind of thing. It was the fact that they made the fighters look bigger than life, which was something that I think is sorely missed with UFC. I understand that, that they're trying to make it, pure sport. They want the sport to be taken seriously, and I understand all of that. But there's something to be said about having a spectacle. There's something to be said about that. It works. If it didn't work, I'll give you an example. Prince Nassim Ahmed, who was a boxer, for those of you who don't know, who basically became one of the biggest draws in all of boxing at a lightweight, something very seldom heard of, simply because he had these elaborate entrances. He was this dick, he was this great heel, and people wanted to see him get beat, and he was this great draw because of that. And, boxing promoters often get this. As much as they say, they put down wrestling, they also get what wrestling does right, and they often try to copy that. And I think one of the things that UFC often will do the pro wrestling type of thing that a lot of people say, oh, they don't do it, but they often do. But they just wait to do it at the right moment. They don't do it all the time, and so they can always go to the fans, see, we're giving you what we want, we're giving you pure sport, we're giving you this and that. But I just gotta say, after watching those videos, it really made me miss Pride that much more, and which I miss it. I usually miss it when I watch an MMA event, because I just found it that much more interesting. And maybe that was why, because it was such a spectacle that even if the fight was bad, you didn't really care, because you were watching this spectacle of a thing. And it's just it's sad to see, to say the least. I know when Affliction came on, I said that it reminded me a bit of Pride, but it wasn't the same. It definitely wasn't the same. It was close, but it just wasn't the same. It still didn't have that atmosphere of, my God, what am I watching? And I think that's something that is sorely missed in MMA, and I think it's one of the things that I doubt we will see changed in MMA, because the MMA fans often hate hearing that. They don't want anything to do with that. Or that's what they say, but then most of them are diehard Pride fans from back in the day, and they loved Pride. So I've never really gotten that part of it. But I did find it odd that the UFC people felt that the show wasn't very good, simply because it was too pro wrestling like. And I can remember watching it and my buddies being into it. And I have one out of the probably the 6 people I watched it with, only one of them is a pro wrestling fan, and they were all into it. So I think that says a lot about the fact that it can work, and that people shouldn't have this kind of leeriness of UFC becoming too pro wrestling, unless they're fixed, unless it looks like the fights are fixed, unless there's that illusion that the fights might be fixed, like we see with boxing. I don't think fans are ever gonna care about that sort of thing. I think the fact that you make it a big spectacle, Monday Night Football for a long time was a spectacle. It was a weekly spectacle. It was the football game of the week that was a weekly spectacle. And there's a lot of events like that that become spectacles that are not just yearly events. And so like the Super Bowl, for example. So I just think that it was just very telling to me, because I felt like just kind of, wow, I really miss Pride, and it just made me miss Pride that much. And a lot of that has to do with UFC 91, because I think UFC 91, going back and thinking about it, it felt much more like a Pride show, in some ways, than a lot of UFC shows have, probably since they officially folded Pride. So there is that. I'm rambling far too much, I know, so I'm just going to go ahead and go. But I just wanted to come on and say that, because I do miss Pride. I miss Pride a lot. I know I'm not the only one, and I miss the elaborate introductions. I miss the elaborate video packages. Like I said, the Pride 33 is just funny, because that show was very hilarious to me, due to the fact of just they did take a dig at UFC, and that was kind of fun to see. But it was just amazing to see, even when they went out, and if you watch their last show, and they knew it was going to be the last show under that banner. It was thought that UFC might keep it around. They still went out with a big freaking bang, and it was still better than just about anything I've ever seen from UFC. So, if there's one thing that if somebody said, what would you love to see UFC pick up as something that Pride did, it would be that. It would be bring back the fact of making it look like a spectacle again, because watching that just reminded me, God, they were awesome at that. So, anyways, I've rambled for far too long. I'm out. Have a good one. Later.